Good afternoon and a warm welcome from the Center for Tourism Research, Wakayama University in Japan. My name is Joseph Chia. I'm a professor here at the Center for Tourism Research. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. David Nguyen, Associate Professor by special appointment at Tohoku University and researcher at the Japan National Research Institute for Earth Science and Disaster Resilience. It's great to see so many colleagues from different parts of the world tuning in. Giuseppe in Portugal, Stephen in Fiji, and others in Japan. Welcome. David was born and raised in Hawaii, where he completed a master's in geography. He received his PhD in civil engineering from Tohoku University and completed his postdoctoral research at the University of Tokyo. Dr. Nguyen specializes in tourism geography and urban planning with a focus on disasters and transportation. Currently, he is one of the project leaders for ISO Technical Committee 268 SC1, which focuses on smart tourism, smart infrastructure for disaster risk reduction. Prior to his current standardization activities, David was a member of the University of Tokyo's graduate program in sustainability science, where he worked on activities related to disaster preparedness of Japanese tourism businesses for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and the 2019 Rugby World Cup. In addition to Japan, David has worked in the Pacific, including in the US state of Hawaii on disaster education, and in American Samoa on projects regarding energy infrastructure resiliency to disasters. As an academic, David has published numerous articles in the areas of tourism, disaster management, and transportation. The title of David's presentation today, Overcoming Negative Disaster Images, How Fukushima's Sake Breweries Rebuilt its Regional Brand, is from a recently published paper in the Journal of Tourism Futures. On behalf of everyone here at the Center for Tourism Research, welcome, David, and we are honored to have you here today.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah, good, okay. Thank you for the warm welcome, Joseph. And welcome everyone to those of you who came to my present both in person and online. My name is David Nguyen, and I am an associate professor by special appointment at Tohoku University. And I also wear a different hat, because many of us, we have to wear different hats, right? So my other job is with the Japanese government at the Research Institute, with NIED, which is the Japanese government's Research Institute for Disaster Science. So today I'll be talking about one of my research, it's actually two papers. One that was just recently published in the Journal of Tourism Futures, and another that was published about 2 years earlier. And what these papers focus on is how Fukushima sake breweries challenge all these negative stereotypes that's surrounding the prefecture, especially in context of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. And a lot of people are always worried about radiation, disaster, etc. And so we look at how the famous sake breweries in Fukushima try to overcome all these negative images. So about me, very quickly. So Joe already mentioned a lot about myself. I'm born and raised in Hawaii, and I received my bachelor's in political science at the University of Hawaii, focusing on international relations. And then I did my master's there as well in tourism and transportation. And my master's thesis focused on Okinawa Prefecture, how over time, over the span of about 40 years, how resort development and transportation development changed the shape or linkages in the island. And that's been published in Asian Geographer. So if you just search my name in Okinawa Asian Geographer, you can read a summary of my master's thesis. And I've been in Japan like quite a few times. I've been in 3 different universities, 4. Waseda University, University of Ryukyus, Tohoku University, and the University of Tokyo. And I did my PhD in Tohoku University in civil engineering, but I'm not really a civil engineer. I'm more of an urban planner. In the US and a lot of other countries, civil engineering and urban planning are 2 separate fields. But in Japan, they merge it together. But it's a bit different. The way to explain it is that, okay, you have a building, right? An architect would be focused on the design of the building. A civil engineer would be focused on how strong the building is. An urban planner would see how the building relates to society. So what is the benefit of this building? Do people like this building? How does the building play a role in the community? So that's what I tend to focus on in my research. After I completed my PhD, I did a 2-year postdoc through JSPS at the University of Tokyo, where I was with the sustainability program. And during that time, the project was focused on the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. And we looked at how all the different rail companies in Japan prepared for a disaster event should there be like a mega tsunami during the Olympics, also the Rugby World Cup, because they're supposed to be 1 year apart. In reality now too. And that was a very fun research because we looked at all the rail companies from Kyushu all the way to Tohoku. And we saw how different companies approach disaster management very differently and how they learned lessons from past disasters, etc. So that was published in IJDRR, or International Journal for Disaster Risk Reduction, I think it was. You can look for that. After I completed my postdoc, I returned to Tohoku University as an assistant professor for the Tohoku Forum for Creativity. Basically, it's a department within Tohoku University that specializes in international conferences. So I did a lot of work in organizing conferences, arranging speakers who would come in, budgets, etc. And I would also participate in the conference. But that was a very short stint. I only worked there for half a year, and then I moved to a different section in Tohoku University that was closer to my field, in the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, where now I'm an associate professor since last year. And I also hold another position with the Japanese government at the National Research Institute for Earth Science and Disaster Prevention, where I also have an office in Kasumigaseki, which is the capital. So I'm always either in Sendai or in Tokyo to do this kind of work. Okay, so going straight into my research, the main two broad goals of what we did for this research is what was the state of the sake brewery or the sake industries before 2011 and what happened after that. So what was the impact of the 2011 disasters, all the rumors and etc. What has happened in these past 10 years, especially what were the impacts of all these negative stereotypes, because a lot of people fear Fukushima now, not just within Japan, but also more internationally. And what has the sake industry done to overcome a lot of these harmful rumors? So for those of you unfamiliar, the Tohoku region is the northeastern region in Japan. It's not the northernmost, that's Hokkaido, but it's right next to it. It has 6 prefectures, and Fukushima is the southernmost in pink, right there. And within, if you take the bullet train or Shinkansen, it's about 1 hour by bullet train. So it's not very far from Tokyo. So why did we choose Fukushima? One of the reasons that Fukushima is really famous for several things. One is peaches, the other is for its like samurai villages, and especially its sake, because its sake wins all these different awards for multiple consecutive years. And it's one of like the products that Fukushima is really like very competitive in. And in addition, it's one of the prefectures most affected by the 2011 disasters. So when we look at this map, the events of 2011 affected a wide area from Hokkaido all the way down to Ibaraki and the Kanto region. But the 3 regions that were most affected in terms of damages, loss of lives, missing people, etc., are Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima. And a lot of them have kind of like different areas where they were more impacted. But Fukushima is very unique because it has like a third of the 3 disasters. You have the earthquake, you have the tsunami, and then you have the nuclear incident at the Daiichi power plant. And that mostly affects the residents of Fukushima. And because of this issue with the nuclear power plant, it's experiencing some of the worst negative images and stereotypes among the Japanese regions. And that's what sets Fukushima apart from the other prefectures within Tohoku. So I want to explain a little bit more about Fukushima before going into this topic. And the Tohoku region is a region that's been in decline for a long time. And if you look at the population changes since the 70s, it's already past its peak. Fukushima has been going down quite significantly. At one point, it was the most populous prefecture in Tohoku, but now it's been surpassed by Miyagi because everyone's moving to, when we say Miyagi, it's actually really Sendai. People are all moving there, but even Miyagi is stagnating. So there's a lot of economic stagnation, population stagnation in this region. And it's actually much worse in the northern ones like Akita and Aomori. I think Akita might have the worst one in Japan. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is the worst. But all the other prefectures, there's like a significant decline in the population. And this is a very important thing to think about when you think about disaster recovery. Because when people recover from disasters, they want to, a lot of people by instinct, they want to go back to the good old days, back to the past, right? But you can't do that because the future is going to be very different. You can't go back to the past because the population is different. It's going to be smaller, it's going to be older, etc. So when you recover from this disaster, you need to think of the future needs and you need to think of how we can recover in a way that matches the future demographic of this area. So as a result of the 2011 disaster, the Japanese government wanted to, hasten economic recovery. And to hasten this recovery, especially of the Tohoku region, they implemented a lot of visa policy changes. And they wanted to use tourism as an engine for recovery. And because of that, they made it easier, especially for Asian tourists, like Chinese tourists, Korean tourists, Taiwanese tourists, etc. They would have a much easier time getting visa, the visa process, or some of them don't even need visas anymore. So after they implemented it, you can see that tourism skyrocketed in every region, almost every region in Japan, especially Okinawa. Like Okinawa went up 800%. You can see that because it's so high, there's like a little bracket because it's off the charts. And then all the other regions like Shikoku, Kanto, Chubu, they're around 200%, right? And then at the bottom is Tohoku, it's just 100%, which basically means they're just getting back to pre-disaster level, right? But the main benefit, the main goal of this policy change was to help tourists go to Tohoku, but nobody really wants to go to Tohoku. People are going to Okinawa instead. They didn't really have much effect from the tsunami. And so when we opened up tourism, when Japan opened up tourism, it affected regions in different ways, right? And then when we look more specifically in the context of Fukushima Prefecture, of course, you saw a huge drop, right, after the year of the disaster. And then since then, it's climbing back up, but it's not really at the pre-disaster level. In fact, it's like stagnating around 56 million. It's not quite reaching what it was before. And unfortunately, I think this might be what's going to be going on for some time. It's just going to stagnate around the same annual numbers. And one of the reasons is because you have a lot of these negative images and stereotypes. For example, here's one, on Al Jazeera, it's like fake image of this giant mutant squid, and it's not real. And then you have like this kind of mutant tomato, and they're kind of using images like, Chernobyl style images. But the thing is, the impacted area, most of Fukushima's population lives in the valley area and in the west, not so much in the coast. But people think the whole area is affected, and they're using these pictures like this is actually not a mutant tomato. It's like some kind of rare natural one. But they're, misusing these images and trying to say like all these crazy things are happening in Fukushima. And here's another famous one. Like you see this a lot there's a lot of conspiracy websites that are saying like, well, the Japanese government, some government is hiding all this damaged information. Look at all this radiation coming out of Japan. But this is an image of a tsunami wave chart from NOAA. You can see that's the original one on the right, and it's been photoshopped to look like something else. But that's just the picture of how the tsunami waves went, and the waves went all the way to South America, to Chile, even Argentina, and etc. It has nothing to do with radiation. It's just the waves. But you can see a lot of these places, these websites, and a lot of these conspiracy groups are kind of more environmental conspiracy groups. They think the big government's trying to, damage the environment, etc. So there's a lot of misinformation, both in the English speaking internet, even the Japanese websites. There's a lot of misinformation out there on Fukushima. So I want to talk a little bit about someone else's research. And for my own research, I often cite two researchers based in Israel, Abraham and Keter, very great guys. I contact them a lot, ask them for advice. And they do a lot of work on place image and how to change it. And this is one of their charts from one of their papers. You can see down here, the original source of how different places change their image. And the reason how they came about is because, as I mentioned, they're based in Israel, and Israel is always in the news associated with, conflict, something political, and et cetera. So it kind of has a negative image. So how does Israeli tourism industries kind of promote their services in the face of constant negative news images? And so that's how these researchers came about with kind of this different changes in destination characteristics. And there's basically two types of changes: a cosmetic approach and a strategic approach. And as the name implies, cosmetic approach is very simple, just like fixing the surface, while a strategic approach tries to fix the underlying problem. And that takes more time, investment, and effort. So the cosmetic approach is like ignoring. So when you promote something, you just ignore the problem, like simplest way. Disassociation and association, you try to link or unlink yourself from a place. So for example, I think his example was that instead of saying we're an Israeli resort, a resort in Israel, they would say we are a resort in the Red Sea, because it sounds a little bit better. And I think there was some islands, I think it was Capo Verde, or it's an island within the Africa region. Instead of saying we are an African resort, they would say we are an Atlantic Ocean resort, which is technically true. So it sounds a little bit more positive. And you see this in Japan as well, and I'll mention that, but that's how you use association and disassociation. You have counter message and spin message ridiculing. So they would try to take the stereotype and make fun of it. Like say, okay, we're a dangerous place, but then you show a picture of everyone having fun, like sarcasm. So these are very simple approaches using just messages. A strategic approach, as I mentioned, it takes time and a lot of money. So things that people do to change the minds of potential markets is hosting events and spinning events. So the industry or government would hold big events and invite a lot of different people to come. And through these events, they hope to change people's minds. And when I mean people, I mean like major markets, like people from different industries. They hope to change the minds of these potential investors so they would receive this area more positively. And most important is tackling. So if there's a problem, for example, in the 80s, Miami, Miami is a very popular tourism destination. It had a lot of problems with crime. You guys remember in the 80s, there was a series called Miami Vice. And that was about the crime in Miami. And since then, Miami took a lot of efforts to increase the number of police as well as social programs to help reduce the number of crime incidents. And it did go down, and that made tourists want to come to Miami. And so that's tackling. And counter branding is basically what it says. You make some kind of brand or model reverse what the negative stereotype is. But this includes some of the other aspects, like they're kind of a set, which makes it strategic and more thorough in terms of changing the image. Now, when we look at the Tohoku region, so in one of my book chapters, which is down here, I looked at all the different slogans and mottos that the Tohoku regions use to advertise, and you can see some of the obvious things. So for example, when people think of Tohoku, especially Japanese people, they would say it's inaka, or very farm or backwards, right? And to non-Japanese people, they'd be like, where is that? Where is Tohoku? And so a lot of these people, these slogans try to spin that or transform it. They're like, okay, this is Japan's hidden secret. This is the best part of Japan, or the real Japan, like this unmodified original Japan that you can't get in Tokyo. And that's how a lot of these places are advertising themselves. And Aomori is very interesting because now we have the Hokkaido Shinkansen, right? It goes straight to Hokkaido, but you have to go through Aomori before you reach to Hokkaido. And everyone knows Hokkaido has a very positive image of, nice seafood, winter festivals, etc. So Aomori tries to disassociate themselves from the rest of Tohoku, and they're like advertising themselves as, we are next to Hokkaido. Why don't you stop, here along the way? So that's kind of associating yourself with Hokkaido. And Iwate, there is a famous mountain. I can't remember the name right now. It's a very large mountain, and what they're doing is like they're saying it's the rival of Fuji. And so that's how you associate yourself. You get something that's more well-known, and you kind of ride off of that fame. But if you look at Fukushima's models are very unique from the other three, from Aomori, Iwate, Miyagi. Their models are not focused in the present. They're kind of ignoring the current situation, which is very negative. Disaster, recovery, radiation. Future from Fukushima, future from now towards a new future. All these things about the potential of Fukushima. So they're trying to sell to put, tourists, investors, etc. They're selling a Fukushima that doesn't exist yet, but that they're trying to achieve. And that's why if you look at a lot of their pamphlets, brochures and stuff, they're trying to show kind of like futuristic yet green Fukushima that has all this technology that is synchronized with nature, etc. And that's what makes it very different from the other Tohoku regions. And that's because Fukushima has such this major issue with negative stereotypes and images that they're focusing on this kind of different image that's in the future, but not today, while all the other prefectures are just kind of associating themselves with other things. So that's what we discovered in analyzing all their brochures and tourism information. Okay, now going back to the sake industry. So using Abraham and Ketter's model for altering place image, this is his process. Basically, you analyze the existing situation, like a background of the characteristic, who the audience are, the place. Then you look at the goals, and then from what kind of goals you want to do, and then you focus on the type of strategies to reach these goals. Like, you want to focus on the source, the message, the audience, etc. And then once you identify the strategy, then you go into the marketing, like the actual marketing, like print, TV, internet, and etc. And this is his model to counteract negative images. So from there, we developed, because there were three of us, our own model based on his multi-step process. So the first one is saying, we look at the characteristic, what are the demographics, what's the economic situation, who's drinking the sake, etc. And then we have the disaster event, and this leads to what is the impact on the brand. And then usually it's going to be a negative impact. So the losses leads to strategies. What are the strategies? What do they focus on? The source, the message, Do they focus on audience, etc.? And then that leads to actual actions, such as what are the local industry doing, what its effects on the communities, and etc. And so when we look at these 4 steps, the more specific questions we want to ask are, in terms of characteristics, what was the state of the sake brewery before 2011? Who were the main customers and what changed? And then we look at the impact. How did the disaster affect the business? How were the effects on the consumers and the markets, both domestic and internationally? And how the negative rumors and stereotypes affected your businesses? Then we look at how these breweries address these impacts through marketing strategies, etc. And then we look at the destination as a whole, like how did it affect Fukushima as a community? So as I mentioned earlier, Fukushima is in the southern part of Tohoku, and it's broadly categorized into 3 areas. Aizu in the west, Nakadori and Hamadori. And Nakadori is where most of the people live. And if you take the Shinkansen, that's where it goes through. There's a stop at Koriyama and there's a stop at Fukushima City. And I think those are the 2 largest cities in Fukushima. And if you look at it closely, there's a lot of mountains. So there's like 2 mountain chains running down. So each area is actually physically separated and they're kind of their own sub-region, right? And it takes a long time. Like if you want to go from Nakadori to Hamadori, you think it's right there, like it's very close. But like from Koriyama to Iwaki, it would take like 2 to 3 hours by train. But from Koriyama to Tokyo, it's like 1 hour at most. So people in like Nakadori feel a little bit more closer to Sendai or Tokyo than they do to other parts of Fukushima, because all these mountains create a very different sense of distance, right? And then Aizu is very famous for tourism. I don't know if has anyone here visited Aizu? Yeah. Was it nice?
I think so.
Like they have this like famous samurai village called Ochijuku. It's like straw roof, very traditional styles, very beautiful. And if you go to Aizu Wakamatsu, they have the castle there. I want to say Wakamatsu-jo, but it's not Wakamatsu-jo. Don't remember the name, it's a different name. But they have like a samurai castle. And of course, they have a lot of sake brewery there. And most of the sake brewery are in Aizu and Nakadori. And we used the official like prefecture newspaper, and they had like 19 sake breweries. And we tried to contact all of them, but only 7 agreed to the interview. And we also interviewed the prefectural government about what they're doing. And although I did this as a researcher, as part of my postdoc in Todai, I also had a side job as a YouTuber, travel YouTuber, for Sendai Hoso or Sendai TV. And they had a budget from the government to promote tourism in Tohoku. So they hired a bunch of students. And at that time I was a student when I first joined, but I still kept doing videos. And they would pay me to go all over Tohoku, make like social media videos, like say, yeah, this is cool and stuff. Come here and stuff. And they would promote it to foreign audiences. So in order to get the breweries to cooperate with me, I had to promise them I would feature them in my video. And so it was kind of like a mutual benefit. Like you let me interview you guys and I'll do a video of your thing. And I'll show you the video in a bit too. So as I mentioned earlier, Fukushima keeps winning a lot of these sake competitions. And this is a very recent one in 2021, where they've gotten quite a number of awards, like tying with Nagano Prefecture. And in earlier news, like they won the top of the sake competition like 6 years straight. And even in the years they don't win, like they're near the top. So they are always winning these awards. Okay, I'm gonna show you one of the videos we made with my student who came along. So we had to do several of these videos to get them to cooperate with us. It was very nice. They gave us a sample of everything they made, and it was difficult to kind of do the research after a few of the shots. But it was a very interesting thing, and they're very open about the situation. So when we talked to them about how it was before the disaster, what was interesting is that they're already affected by the changing demographics. So I mentioned everything's kind of declining in Tohoku, right? And so 2 of the 7 breweries said nothing really changed, but the other 5 said, yeah, a lot of things have changed because of the changing demographics. Sorry for the typo. And generally people are drinking less. And especially sake, like they said 1973 was the peak of sake consumption. And since then, people, each year drink less and less sake. And even beer has declined since the 90s. That was surprising for me. So there's been a lot of changes in what kind of alcohol is being drunk in Japan. And then we had the disaster. And from the disaster, every brewery we interviewed were impacted. They were affected by the disaster. 3 of them, they couldn't, export their breweries or products because a lot of countries, banned the import of products from Fukushima. And those countries are mainly within Asia because they were really worried about the radiation. So Korea banned it, Taiwan banned it, China banned it, and etc. And in a total, 54 countries banned anything that says made in Fukushima. Over time, it got reduced. The last I checked was 27 in 2018, probably less now. But there are still some countries that still have their ban in place. So this means there's a lot of loss of international market. And some breweries have actual physical damage to the infrastructure. So they were unable to actually transport their products because the factory is destroyed or the road is destroyed or they don't have the resources to deliver their products. And then we also have issues with tariffs. This is not really related to the disaster. It's more of a political thing. But because of tariffs, it made it harder to sell their products abroad. And in general, there's not that many people that speak English very fluently in Fukushima. So it's very hard for the companies to, conduct business abroad, et cetera, and promote their products. And when we look at the local situation, a lot of local people don't want to drink local beer. They want national brands, or they don't like the local sake, even though, it's winning. And distant areas of Japan, especially like say Kyushu, like the further you go from Tohoku, the more people don't really want to try Tohoku things. So the further south and west you go, the less the less interest they have in Tohoku products or visiting Tohoku. And that's something else I found in other research. Like in terms of visiting Tohoku, like Tokyo people are a bit more open because they're next door. And I think they understand the radiation issue isn't as big. But when I started interviewing people from Kansai, like here, or from Kyushu, like Fukuoka, they become more worried about it. And maybe their worries are a bit more exaggerated. So they're less inclined to visit Tohoku or try anything from Tohoku, especially Fukushima. So in terms of counter strategies, so what they've done is to kind of adapt to the changing demographic trends. And so a lot of these breweries we interviewed, they're making more fruit flavored alcohol. They're also making chuhai, and they're just making things that are not sake, which is interesting because they started as a sake company. But especially younger people now, they don't really drink, sake, right, in Japan. So these breweries have to make different things. And as for the markets, like such as all those Asian countries that ban Fukushima products, so they just had to go elsewhere. They went to a lot of European countries, and they went to the United States and the Americas in general, actually. And to do this, the local government has to play a very important role. And this is public collaboration comes in. And some of these sake breweries, they don't have resources, right, to reach out to other countries. So what the prefectural government does is that Well, first at the national level, they had Cool Japan. You guys heard of Cool Japan, where they push all these different products. And so from Cool Japan, they receive a budget, right, to promote local things. And then from the prefecture level, they have these hosting events, what I mentioned as strategic counter branding. And at these hosting events, they would bring in all these different people from Japan, different regions, and even foreign like markets. Like they may invite like a famous influencer from France, maybe a famous chef from America, and etc. And they would try all these different drinks, and usually their perceptions of Fukushima change at these events. And so these events are very important in order to start the process of changing the image of Fukushima. And also the government also is the one that can do political maneuvering to reduce tariffs, because this is beyond the control of the breweries, right? So they push the prefecture, which in turn pushes the national government. And through there, they can help reduce some of the barriers to short trading that allows the Fukushima products to be sold around the world. And then we have private sector initiatives. So a lot of the breweries are of varying sizes. So some of the more bigger ones, they do their own kind of open house events, and they reach out to other countries on their own. And that's also been very effective. But however, one brewery we interviewed said they had zero support. So out of the 7, 1 was kind of negative about their working with the local government, but generally speaking, the others were more positive. So in terms of community outreach, this is a very important thing. And I realize a lot of the breweries are very tight knit. And after the disaster, everyone's they have a hard time. Like a lot of people may have lost their jobs, family members, etc. And people aren't buying stuff anymore, right? And so what the breweries try to do is that they try to hire local people, like especially farmers, because farming is very seasonal, right? Like they may work this month, but they may not have anything. So they try to employ them during the off season. And they also try to buy local. So like if they need a rope for their products, they'll buy from a local rope company. They'll try to buy from a local rice for the brewery, buy local. And if they can't buy local, then they'll buy something from the next prefecture, like Niigata or Miyagi. So they try to keep it supportive within the community so they can help each other out. And they also have this sake brewery academy, which is interesting. So all the different breweries, even though they're rivals, they meet up, I think at that time it was like once a month, and they would exchange, business tactics and stuff, because it's not just them. Like the breweries are the whole region. They're a brand of the region, right? And so they need to work together to kind of elevate each other up and to strengthen the image of Fukushima. And so that's what they've been doing, to collaborate, not just with each other, but with the government, as I mentioned, and even the universities. So a lot of universities are researching how to make better sake, like what kind of rice should we use, what kind of process we should use, etc. And it's through all of this that they have been able to win a lot of competitions. And one thing I forgot to mention is the safety standards. So because there's more years of radiation contamination, Fukushima's products tend to be more thoroughly examined. Like they really try to test to see the radiation level, etc. And in many ways, you can say they're safer than other parts of Japan, because they're really researching, like double, triple checking the safety standards of the brewery and etc. So they're really emphasizing that their products are safe. And then this expands to tourism. So now they're trying to kind of imagine Fukushima as like a Napa Valley. And you guys know Napa Valley, right? It's like famous wine region in California. And so they're trying to imagine Fukushima as the next Napa Valley of Japan, because of all these sake breweries winning all these awards. And it focuses on sake products and breweries. And even if you go to the Fukushima tourism, like prefecture website, they have something called Fukushima Sake Story. And this is more broader. It includes a lot of different alcohol, but you can go there and you can see where you can visit to check out some of the sake and stuff, and even try some of it. And so now, Fukushima is trying to recover based on the success of the sake industry. And so to recap, let me use this instead. So to recap using the structure that we proposed based on Abraham and Ketter's place altering structure, in terms of characteristic, as I mentioned, everything was declining population economy, and that resulted in changing consumption habits and also the changes in sales of the sake. Then the disaster created a negative impact in terms of safety, radiation fears, etc., and also the ban on imports, which resulted in a loss of sales. And to counter this, the Fukushima sake industry and the government and other stakeholders use both a cosmetic and strategic approach. And the strategic approach is more important here because they really put a lot of effort to change the audience of the consumers of the sake. And they really try to fix the sake, or there wasn't really a problem, but they try to improve it to make it safer, taste better, etc. And they try to reach out to find new markets for the products of Fukushima. And the effects of this on the destination as a whole is that you have the community supporting each other and trying to help maintain employment levels. And these awards help kind of slowly, but I think definitely reverse the image of negativity with these positive news, like we are winning, and we are winning these best awards. And through this, now I think Fukushima is finding how to rebrand itself now as like a new Napa Valley to help promote tourism based on the success of the sake industry. And here is our paper that was just published in Journal of Tourism Futures that you can read there. And I think it's open access, right? So you don't need to pay for anything, you can read it for free. And there are some limitations to this research I want to mention. So we only focused on the sake breweries, and Fukushima produces more than just sake or rice wine. They produce a lot of different alcohol. So we don't know if the other kind of breweries have similar issues. And in addition, non-alcohol industries. So for example, Fukushima, I think, does a lot of peaches like momo. And the agriculture sector is another sector that has a lot of, radiation fears, like fears of the water being contaminated, is the water being used. And so that's another thing that requires separate research. And I don't know for sure, but I believe that the agricultural sector is still having a harder time recovering from these negative images compared to sake, because sake is really manufactured stuff. Okay, so this concludes my presentation. Thank you for joining in this 50 minutes. I'd be happy to take any questions and comments.
Thank you very much, David. If you are in the audience, in your office or at home, give David a virtual clap. As David mentioned, the article that some of this paper today is based on is published in the Journal of Tourism Futures. It's freely available, and it's a really good, gives us a good understanding of responses to disaster. And this issue of place image and how to change it is going to become ever more important as if we are to believe what we're told. Disasters will become more frequent. So for those working on destination management and place making, this becomes very important. The contrasting approaches to the cosmetic approaches or the strategic approaches is also an important one, as David has illustrated today. And adaptation to disaster is something that is increasingly becoming an important issue in in tourism. And a mutual colleague of ours, his name is Professor Ilan Hellman from University College London. He disputes that disasters and human disasters? No, he dislikes the term natural disasters because he said disasters are not natural. Disasters, disaster events have always occurred, but humans turn them into disasters because of the way we live or adapt to the environment. Right. So we'll go to some questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat, but we'll have some questions in the audience here behind the camera. You can't see. Does anybody have a question they would like to pose to David about his presentation?
Hi, David. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I would be quite interested whether, I was wondering, did you also evaluate whether they have like digital strategies in overcoming the negative images?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. At the time of the research, I think we did it in 2018 and 18 to 19. We didn't ask that specific question, but it didn't seem like many of them had, because a lot of them are, generally more traditional and older, especially when it comes to the sake industry. But I think that have changed because I think, especially because of the COVID situation really changed a lot of things, and a lot of people couldn't do or go anywhere. And what I see, not just in Fukushima, but a lot of different places, they're trying to do digital tourism. And I think through there, a lot of companies are trying to establish a kind of like digital infrastructure to better introduce their product to the world. And I think that's what some of them are looking into or have been developing. Unfortunately, we can't taste it visually.
You were talking about the castle in Aizu. Andrew Coombs has left a message saying that it's Sugajo Castle.
That's right, it's Sugajo.
So thank you, Andrew, for your comment. Anybody have another question? I think this issue of rural revitalization and resilience to disasters is something here at the Center for Tourism Research that we are looking at in a number of different ways, whether it be pilgrimage tourism or cultural tourism. And one of the things that you mentioned in your talk was about public-private collaboration as a way of trying to deal with the mismatch between what is reality and what is the image. Can you discuss what the challenges are to public-private collaboration? Because public priorities versus private priorities can be quite different, right? As we see during the pandemic now, the public priority is to manage public health, the private sector is to recover. In Fukushima, how did that play out? Was there collaboration or?
Generally speaking, so private-public collaboration, especially between the local governments and tourism, that's been something I've been researching for quite a while. And it's not just Fukushima, but Tohoku as a whole, especially in the tourism industry. And especially in the hotel sector, I've noticed there's a lot of different issues. And one of the main things is like the time cycles, right? A lot of the government side, they tend to focus on like fiscal years or election cycles, etc. So they tend to think of projects or funding in terms of that scale. While private businesses have a very different sense of time, and they're generally more focused on profit. And I think when we did the research on the hotel sector, that was a big issue. And in terms of like using resources, it was very different. But in terms of the Fukushima breweries, it generally seemed quite positive because they had areas that they were mutually helping each other. For example, as I mentioned earlier, Fukushima's breweries didn't have the right resources for international promotion, other than maybe one or two breweries. And so I think that's where the prefecture helped because they have English-speaking staff and I think other staff that are capable of speaking other languages. And when we interviewed Fukushima prefecture, The person who talked to us was actually American, and they always since then had an American person working with them, which really helped a lot of their overseas promotions. And I think even Fukushima City, at the city level, they also have quite a few foreign staff that are able to help, promote the region more internationally. So I think that's been very good. And I think one of the audience members, one of those people. So I think in that case, the sake brewery, I think it's been it seems to be a very positive collaboration. But there was one, like I mentioned, there was one brewery that said they received zero help, and another brewery that said, although they received help, their internal resources were better. And I think they're more of an exception to the rules because that specific brewery is very financially well off, and they have their resources to do it. So I think it's good to have these resources than without it, especially for the small ones.
Another question is in relation to, you mentioned social media and as a way of trying to change people's perception and attract people.
Sometimes disasters can be most effective in bringing a place to the mind of potential travelers, right? Because sometimes, for example, I imagine from a public relations and awareness point of view, the best thing that's ever happened to Fukushima is that the disaster, because it's brought the name Fukushima to a global audience who wouldn't have otherwise heard of it. That then brings up the issue of how do you change the image of a place, especially if the image of a place is such that it's associated with disaster and not other things that entice travelers like safety and enjoyment and culture. Does social media have a role to play in place image and the changing of place image, do you think?
I think definitely yes. I think it seems, as technology improves, more and more people are receiving their information through social media sources rather than traditional sources. And this is, one of the hot topics because people are always wary about the role, the power or influence of Facebook, Instagram, and etc. because more people are consuming information from there than traditional information, which could be good and bad because, as you know, there's a lot of Facebook news lately because of a lot of the misinformation, right? But on the other hand, because of, YouTubers like me and other people that I know, they actually go to these places and they actually research and stuff, and they bring in, the actual information. And I think it's generally been overall more positive. It's not something I've researched like the effect of social media, but I think in terms of like people visiting and stuff, generally when people visit the Tohoku region, their minds always, improve for the better. Like they see how it really is and etc. And I think in this sense, social media is a very powerful tool to dispel a lot of these negative rumors, negative images and stuff like, yay, there's no giant squid here, there's no giant octopus. And one big thing that's been happening right now, not related to Fukushima, but related to negative images, a lot of YouTubers are going to, Ukraine to visit Chernobyl, and they're trying to see, what it is like there. And most of the time it's just normal life. So I think that's something that's been, I think, beneficial to show the normalcy of Fukushima.
Question? Yeah. Yes, question from Kazue Nakamoto.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. I feel like I would like to know more about your research. I'd like to know, to recover from the negative image, particularly in Fukushima Sake Brewery, what would be the critical element, the most important element to recover from the negative image? I mean, you need to provide plenty of information or promotion or time, government support, community support.
That's a very good question. I'm not really sure which one I could rank, which is the most important. I think, of course, government support is very important, like vital, because they have a lot of the resources that some breweries may not have. So I might put that as one of the key factors to help overcome negative images. But the tool they have to use is promotion. So those who think government support and promotion, I think those are the most important thing. Time is always another thing that's always important because, it's like relationships, right? Time heals all wounds. So I think over time, people may, I won't think they forget what happened in Fukushima, but it may become like a smaller thing. And then because when it becomes smaller, then they maybe can see Fukushima as a more normal place. Similar to like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think like maybe in the 50s and 60s, people were afraid of it. But now when we think of Hiroshima, we think of deers, Miyajima, and it's transformed itself to like a very popular tourism destination.
Because to produce a good sake, you need a good quality of water and rice.
Right.
So it takes time.
It does take time, right? And I think they're really working hard to make all these like nice varieties of rice grains and stuff for sake.
And Nicholas Progano from Center for Tourism Research.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting answer about much about the Fukushima sake industry. I wanted to ask a question about its relationship with the agricultural sector in general. That you mentioned that the agricultural sector hasn't been recovering as much. There's so many worries about the safety. That if you have to find that the recovery in the sake breweries that use these agricultural resources has also had some kind of benefit for the general agricultural sector of Fukushima.
From what I understand in the interviews, local rice growers, of course, have the benefit because a lot of the breweries try to use local rice, right? So I think in that sense, the agricultural sector that does rice that's used for sake, they have like a stable customer. And I think some of the farmers may work in both sides. So I think that's beneficial. But in terms of like fruits, right? Because fruits generally have some of the negative images, like we don't want radioactive fruits or etc. I can't comment on it because I don't know if they are working with them. I would think so because some of them, as I mentioned, they're making fruity flavored alcohol, but I've never pushed into that topic. I should have, I think, now in retrospect. So I can't really comment if they're working on other types of products.
David, just to add to Nicholas's question, in many rural areas around the world, for tourism development to establish itself, it relies on cross-sectoral cooperation and linkages with agriculture, with cultural tourism, with marine tourism or mountain tourism. Were you able to detect the extent to which collaboration was an important factor in establishing a new image, so that everybody was working towards the same agenda across sectors? Because if we talk about things like agritourism or gastronomy tourism, it's requires a cross-sectoral collaboration.
From what I understand through the interviews, for example, I mentioned about this kind of like Napa Valley, etc. And it seems that some of the breweries already had this in mind, probably before the prefecture. But now the prefecture is also doing it. So I think there's a common goal towards kind of a regional tourism image based on sake tourism. And I think because of that, they are now working together. But to what degree, I can't really answer. Because as I mentioned, especially I think it was Aizu, they already kind of started developing their image of what it should be. And it was a bit independent from the prefecture. I don't know if they came together since then. I think if they most likely did, because I saw their brewery listed in the new prefecture webpage. And this webpage was created after this research, so it's a bit recent. It has a much more expanded list of breweries that they're working with. And so I assume that they are now working with them Yeah.
mhm.
towards like promoting like this new kind of image of Fukushima Valley.
Okay, that leads on to an associated question. Here in Wakayama Prefecture, one of the things we're finding is that oftentimes people come from outside to stimulate new development. Entrepreneurs or people with ideas will move to a rural area and through their investment or their intellectual capital, create these industries that stimulate local involvement. Is that evident in the research that you did in Fukushima? Were there lots of people from outside coming in as the drivers of redevelopment, or was it left to the locals?
I think primarily it's left to the locals, but one of the sake breweries we interviewed, they relocated because they were in the Moderator region, which is by the coast, the area that was affected by radiation, and they moved to a different area. So that's kind of internal migration, and they reestablished their brewery there. And I believe one of the breweries based in Fukushima City, the owners were not originally from Fukushima, but it was not a question I often asked, and most of the breweries are very long established. So I assume that they're local.
Masato, Center for Tourism Research.
For your interesting research. I'm interested in how much the activity is successful, because I'm aware of that sake is very popular in the world right now. So many people like Japanese sake, but how about exportation from Fukushima? Is it very successful after their rebranding activities?
Unfortunately, they didn't give me any numbers of their sales. I think some of them are not open to that. So I can't really answer that question. But I think it does sound like the government collaboration to find new markets help offset the loss. But we're talking in terms of offsetting loss. We don't know if it really went past, what they had before. And that's, something I want to know as well. Because if we look at the tourism, for example, it went back up, but it never went back better than before, right? It's just trying to catch up, but not quite. So that's something I want to know specifically about the sake sales. But unfortunately, they didn't give us that information.
David, one of the things you talked about was seasonality before and the impacts of seasonality, and lots of rural areas suffer from seasonality, whether it be busier during summer and then quieter in the winter, but also the visitation midweek versus weekend. Because Fukushima is so close to Tokyo, is there a disproportionate visitation on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays and not the rest of the week? Because that can have an impact on the way businesses are run.
Right. Well, I don't have the numbers for daily visitor rates, but I assume in general, Japan is the same most of the time because everyone in Japan takes holiday at the same time, unfortunately. So I think, more people come on the weekends and during those special consecutive holidays like Golden Week, Obon, year end. I think that's when people go in, especially these days, we have those go-to travel events. And I think that pushes a lot of people to go.
Because it seems to me that if someone visits Fukushima, and this is not from necessarily from your research, but from your observations and understanding, to construct an itinerary, you need more than just the sake, right? You might want to go on to a national park, or you might want to go to a shrine.
Right.
Is there evidence of this kind of cooperation between the sake breweries and other parts of tourism, because they must work together to create a viable destination, right?
Right. So from my travels, because I've been to all 47 prefectures. That's another thing I been active in doing. And as I mentioned, there's 3 different regions in Fukushima, as I mentioned earlier. And when I went to the Aizu region, I noticed they had their own kind of plan. And Aizu region kind of, in many ways, they try to see themselves, it seems, a little bit separate from Fukushima. And one reason is because the access is a little different. So you either have to go through Koriyama and then you take the local line westward. But from Tokyo, you have a direct train. You take this train called Rebati Aizu, and it goes, I think, from Kita Senju Station, which is in northern Tokyo, and it goes straight to Aizu area. And it's a very comfortable train, very easy to get there. It's like 4 hours direct. And when you get to Aizu Wakamatsu and you look at the brochures, they connect everything, like go to the castle, then go to the brewery. And so they try to link the 2 main elements that Aizu is famous for: traditional historical things and sake. So I would assume that maybe the cultural monuments organization responsible for that also work with the sake brewery.
Andrew Coombs, who's from the Fukushima City Tourism and Convention Association, said that tourism at the local level is still quite segmented, and it's difficult to get local government areas to cooperate. So as well as public-private collaboration, this kind of public-public, from different parts of the prefecture getting their cooperation is vital, right? Because while you may say that there are 3 separate parts to the region, for most people who don't understand that, they see it as one region, right?
Right. And I think Andy is very correct. As I mentioned, Aizu seems like they're kind of doing their own thing. I'm sure they do talk with the governments in Asera, but sometimes, like at a more regional level, people may think they're more effective than at the prefectural level or even national level. So this is something that the Tohoku region as a whole is still figuring out, because Tohoku is not really a popular tourism destination. Many other prefectures have their own DMOs that they've established years ago, but Tohoku just recently established it in the last 5 years. So they're still in the infancy stages. So getting everyone on board is going to take time, I believe.
Yeah. It raises the general problem of trying to get regional cooperation, whether it be with a group of islands or communities or prefectures, because in the end, it's viewed as something competitive. Right. We want tourists to choose us and not the next prefecture, or our town and not this town. So as Andrew says, it's difficult to get local government areas to cooperate. And I think that's a global problem, not just a challenge rather than a problem.
Right.
For Fukushima.
Where I come from, Hawaii, why our DMO, the Hawaii Tourism Authority, came about was that, we have 8 islands, right? And it takes some time and effort to get to Hawaii because it's isolated. But then which island do you go to? And, they're a little similar. So in order to reduce the islands from competing with each other, generally speaking, each island kind of specializes in different things, like Oahu, which has Honolulu. That's more of the shopping area because it's more metropolitan. The Big Island would have the volcano, so you do the kind of volcano tourism, while like I'm from Hawaii. My brain part right now. Kauai has a lot of rain, so they promote themselves as natural tourism because it's very green there. So each island has something they specialize in, and that's how they try to promote and prevent cross-island competition. And so I think this is something maybe the regions within the Tohoku area need to figure out, like whose boundary is what, how to cooperate together, and not easy.
Maybe to share Dave's Hawaiian example, in Australia, where I'm from, it's the same thing. You have the National Tourism Organization advertising Australia abroad. Then you have cities like Sydney or Melbourne or the Gold Coast advertising themselves, because they know if someone comes from, say, the UK to Australia, they want them to come to their city first, because that's where they will spend all the money, where they stay and where they're based. So it's a challenging issue trying to get regional cooperation. So we have a question here from Giuseppe Aliperti, who is at the University of Deusto in Spain. Giuseppe says, my question is related to risk communication and the role of media and local government. Media in Europe describes the Fukushima accident as still not completely managed. How is the real situation? Is there the risk that different markets, for instance, European versus Japanese, perceive Fukushima's brewery industry in a different way, not only due to cultural differences, but also for risk communication and media management? Which is the role of the local government in that sense? There's a few questions in there, Dave, if you want to. Thank you, Giuseppe, for your question.
Okay, so risk perception is an interesting topic, especially when we look at the different countries. And there was a research that I did. I never published it because I didn't have enough samples, and I don't think I'll ever finish it. But what we found out, and this was through like some kind of education program we had at the university, especially within Asia, different Asian regions perceive risk differently, and this translates to tourism. So Korea doesn't really have a lot of disasters, right? Sometimes they have typhoons, but not really, not like Japan. So Koreans, they're more risk averse, like they're more scared of disasters because they don't experience it. So when Japan had the disasters, the Korean market just dropped sharply. They don't want to go to Fukushima at all. Like they're very scared. And when you talk to them, they're like, oh, I don't think I can survive an earthquake, even though, we have daily earthquakes. So their perception of risk is very different compared to Taiwan. Taiwan has a jillion typhoons every summer. They have a lot of landslides, a lot of flooding, and etc. And they think of risk very differently. And that's why Taiwanese tourists are kind of preferred in Japan, because they are willing to go anywhere because they know how to manage it. And in that case, there are a more stable, I guess, tourism resource market for Japan. Unfortunately, both Korea and Taiwan blocked Fukushima products. I don't know if it changed since the time we researched, but that's how different cultures perceive risk differently. And I think the American market, from what I understand from the interviews, the Americans are actually more open to Fukushima products because the US has a lot of experiences with risk. I mean, America is a big country, but it does have a lot of disasters. We have a lot of tornadoes in the central part. The West Coast of Hawaii has a lot of volcanoes and earthquakes. And the East Coast has a lot of hurricanes, which you call typhoons here, or cyclones in South Asia. So, and then we also have, issues, a lot of like petty crime. So I think Americans are more willing to accept risk. And I think Europe, especially the Mediterranean area, they have a lot of earthquakes and wildfires, while Western Europe has a lot of flooding. So I think if we look in terms of how often they have a disaster, there's a relationship with how they perceive risk and how willing they are to travel to Japan and also accept Japanese products, especially from Fukushima.
Okay. Did you want to ask? I think that was Giuseppe's question, all in one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he mentioned about the local government. And I think in that sense, it's the local government's job to look at which market understands this risk or which one not to go to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And does anybody in the audience have another question or comment they would like to make? Masato-san?
Do you think the Japanese government or local municipality, I don't know, they should promote Japan as it's a safe country, even though we have many natural disasters? Depends on the market.
Oh, that's a tough question. Okay, I don't know what the best strategy would be, because when my friends who've never been to Japan ask me, is it safe? You cannot lie. There is always some kind of natural hazard risk because Japan's location is always going to happen. You cannot lie and say it's nothing. But at the same time, I tell them you get used to it. Because especially the Tohoku area has more seismic activity than other parts. So we feel some shaking every week, maybe a bigger shaking like 3 or 4 times a year. And for me, at least, if it's under 7, it's nothing. After that, maybe I worry, but you get used to it. And when I lived in Okinawa, they have powerful typhoons every single year. But you get used to it. You know what to do, and it's not a big deal. I would say, yeah, like just come to Japan. I don't know. When you say safe, it just sounds kind of loaded, if it makes sense. So I don't know. I wouldn't even address it if I would market it. I would just say like secure may sound better because I think Japanese government really made a lot of effort to, in the last 10 years, to have signs like evacuation signs in many language. Even when I came here by train on the Kuroshio line, they have a pamphlet in English and Japanese, like what to do during a tsunami, which is very cool. And even all the way here. So I think Japan has made a lot of efforts to make tourists feel safe, or at least give enough information so you know what to do. And I think in that regard, we can say like Japan is prepared.
So David, just to get to the end of today's presentation, like most researchers, the work is never done, right? What's there left to do as a follow-up to this project, in your opinion? And Andrew Coombs from the tourism, the Fukushima City Tourism and Convention Association would be very interested, I'm sure, to have you investigate more of the challenges that they face in tourism. What's one challenge that remains, do you think, now?
For Fukushima?
Yes.
I think it's the same thing. The two challenges, one is demographic decline. That's a very big ongoing issue. And this affects the whole city because the city has to rethink of how to configure their space, right? And especially in Tohoku, a lot of cities are rebuilding. So they're like thinking, should we rebuild it to be more compact because our city was going to be smaller and older? And this indirectly affects tourism. Like, how do you promote something? Because I think Toyama had an issue where everything was being spread out. Then they redeveloped the rail line to make the city compact. And after it became compact, tourists increased because everything's more walkable. So that's something to think about. And then the radiation issue is it's still ongoing. Like the stereotypes still exist. And I think it will take some time before people, don't really talk about it. So these are still constantly ongoing. One research I'm doing right now is the impact of the Olympic on Fukushima. This I'll talk about later, actually. Once I finish it, I'll talk about it.
Good idea. Okay. One final question. I know that now, and you mentioned Chernobyl before, right? As a disaster site, there's some kind of comparisons, obviously at different points in time.
Right.
But I see now in Chernobyl, they're using the disaster as a vehicle to really promote tourism, dark tourism and disaster tourism. Is there evidence that Fukushima is also doing that more deliberately?
So I can't really say about Fukushima because in terms of like damage, like memorials and stuff, I know more of Iwate and Miyagi, and they want to take those like famous damaged schools and buildings where a lot of people lost their lives, and they're turning it into like a tourism destination as a form of like memorial educational tourism. But people are always mixed on this, right? It's still fresh, and there's a lot of people that want it gone. They don't want a reminder. But then there's others who disagree, and they're like, no, this is a memorial. You always have to remember. And remembering is a part of resiliency, because if you remember the disaster, you know what to do next time. And there's been a lot of research that people forget over time, and in Hawaii, where I'm from, we had 2 huge tsunamis in the 40s and 60s. And, for first 5-10 years, people are like, yeah, we're ready. But when new generations come in, they forget about it. They don't know what to do. They panic. And so at least for Hilo, which was the most affected city by the disaster, they have their memorials that they try to promote and to ensure, a continued perception of risk that goes through the generation. So for me personally, I think we should highlight these kind of things. I don't like the word dark tourism because it sounds very negative, although sometimes it really is, showing off the dark side. But in terms of disaster, it can be thought of like as resiliency tourism, how people recover and learn from these instances.
Okay, so just to close, thank you to the audience for joining us today. Also, thank you to everyone online. I see Andrew, thanks for joining us from the Fukushima City Tourism Association. Benjamin, who was here last year, thanks Benjamin for joining us, and Debbie from Indonesia. Gisa, your friend Gisa.
Oh yeah.
She's here. Giuseppe, thanks for joining us. Hope to see you here soon. Januszka from the Netherlands, and everyone else. And Raphael, one of our PhD students. Raphael, thank you for joining us. I know you're just in the next room or next building. So thanks for joining us. We appreciate that. Also, please join us again. We will have these webinars with different researchers publishing books and papers of interest. We will look forward to you joining us again next time. David, thank you again. And we can give David a clap. Everyone out there, thank you. Goodbye.